Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Charlotte Gallagher, and in the early hours of Friday, the 18th of May, these are our main stories. The EU is to take legal action to protect European companies threatened by US sanctions against Iran. Gina Haspel has been confirmed as the CIA's first female director, despite her links to the use of brutal interrogation methods. Political prisoners who've taken over parts of a notorious jail in Venezuela say they fear riot police are preparing to attack it. Also in this podcast, why a pair of football boots are going on display at the British Museum.
An Egyptian icon with a global impact, but there's also a British element to the story. And so we thought it would be a fantastic addition to the collection, a very modern one.
And
we've had to live with lots of earthquakes continuously, sonic booms and explosions shaking the house and almost blowing the windows. And that's been ongoing continuously since last Saturday.
In Hawaii, residents are under siege from powerful volcanic eruptions. When President Trump announced he was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposing sanctions on the country, his European allies knew it could affect their trade relations with Tehran. And now the European Union has hit back, saying it will take steps to protect European companies which deal with Iran from a US embargo. Jean-Claude Juncker is the president of the European Commission.
It's the
duty of the European Union to protect European business, and that applies in particular to small and medium-sized companies. This is why we are launching the process to activate the blocking statute from 1996, which aims to deal with the extraterritorial application of sanctions when they affect the European Union. So we'll be doing that tomorrow morning.
Our Europe correspondent Gavin Lee spoke to me from Bulgaria, where the EU leaders have been meeting. He explained their decision.
Trade for the EU, the companies that deal with Iran, is about 20 billion euros a year. And with the US now pulling out, you're talking about those companies having to have a massive impact. Total of France, the oil company, you've got Maersk, the shipping company in Denmark. Both of them saying today, as things go, they will have to pull out of Iran. Several other European companies as well. So we've had something unprecedented today. You've had, first of all, the head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, saying that it's beyond a joke. Yesterday, he said, with having friends like Donald Trump, who need enemies? And today, they're looking for the first time to launch what's called blocking measures. Now, this would be to make sure European companies basically ignore the sanctions and refuse to acknowledge any courts that try to impose them from the US. It's never been tried before. It's once been threatened. Go back to 1996, when then Bill Clinton was trying to pressurise companies not to deal with Cuba. It worked for him. EU leaders, when they announce these measures tomorrow, will hope it works for Donald Trump.
And this kind of language that they're using about the US decision to pull out of the deal, calling it beyond a joke, how serious is this rift between the US and EU? Is their relationship now at rock bottom?
Well, that's a bit of a carrot and stick at the moment as well, because on the one hand, we hear this language. It sounds particularly from Donald Tusk, who's a top diplomat, the president of the European Council, who's usually a mediator. He's choosing these words deliberately. He also said that the US administration is capriciously assertive with its policy not just on Iran but trade tariffs as well. I think the hope is, by all of them uniting, it does a sort of media diplomacy, that the message gets to Donald Trump about how seriously they're taking this, and on the other side they're saying we want to continue this tight transatlantic bond at the same time. So just to step back from it a second, I think the hope is that there's a breather. There's a few weeks before anything serious could happen with European companies being affected on the Iran deal. But as leaders leave the summit behind me, I think that's the thought will be on most of the leaders' minds. What happens next on this Iran deal?
Gavin Lee. The US Senate has voted in favour of Donald Trump's nominee for the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Gina Haspel will be the first ever woman to lead the CIA, but her appointment has been controversial. From Washington, here's our correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue.
After a bruising process, the Senate voted 54 to 44 to confirm Gina Haspel's nomination as CIA director, a margin that could have been a lot tighter given her controversial background. During questioning in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, she was repeatedly pressed over her attitude to the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques used by the agency after the 9/11 attacks. Ms Haspel ran one of the so-called black sites, secret prisons outside the US where terror suspects were subjected to waterboarding. Ms Haspel has now said the CIA should not have used such methods and would not do so again, even if the president demanded it.
Gary O'Donoghue reporting. To Venezuela now, where political prisoners have apparently taken control of the headquarters of the intelligence agency in the capital, Caracas. They've been releasing videos asking for freedom and medical attention. Our Latin America correspondent Katie Watson is in Caracas.
So on Wednesday, these videos surfaced of inmates saying that they've taken over part of the cell blocks of what's known as El Helicoide. Now, that's the headquarters of Venezuela's Secret Service. It's also a detention centre. It actually was officially built as a shopping centre and it was converted into a detention centre. So they are, I understand, still in control of the cell block inside, and their relatives have been outside calling for justice, calling for respect to their human rights and calling for their freedom. But as yet, there's been an impasse and the government said nothing officially so far.
This place, you'd imagine, must have really tight security. How on earth did they manage to get control?
Well, that's what everybody's asking. I mean, SEBIN, which is the Secret Service, is very on top of a lot of political opponents. They, follow opposition candidates' rallies. I was at one the other day and I saw the Secret Service following the candidate. The question is why they're doing this, or why they're not doing anything. I mean, 3 days before the elections on Sunday, perhaps they're just trying to play it calm. But at the same time, there is concern, certainly from the relatives, that this could end violently.
And what exactly are these prisoners asking for?
There are 300 political prisoners that are held, and that one of the big concerns is these people have been in prison for inciting violence, taking part in opposition protests, and they say that they're being held unfairly. And they say that there's not been any trial brought against them, not been any charges. There needs to be some kind of due process. There needs to be respect to their human rights, and ultimately they need to be freed. And there were people outside chanting, down with the dictatorship, we want justice. It's the problem here in Venezuela between the opposition and the government.
Katie Watson. A new study has revealed that 1/3 of the world's protected lands are being degraded by human activities and are no longer fit for purpose. 6 million square kilometres of forests, parks and conservation areas are under intense human pressure from mining, logging and farming. Our environment correspondent Matt McGrath has more details.
This report has looked at the impact on biodiversity of human activities around the world, and it says that basically of all the protected areas, the parks, the conservation areas, the reserves that have been put in place over the last 20 or 30 years, about 1/3 of them are seriously degraded because of human activities. Now, these are areas that countries have said, look, you're not supposed to be doing anything here. But unfortunately, in rich and poor countries, there's lots of things going on, like logging, like farming, like mining. I spoke to one of the authors and he pointed at Australia and the United States and said these countries are very rich. They've got great biodiversity, amazing species, and a lot of them are protected in protected areas. But they're still building towns in these protected areas. They're logging. They're opening up farms. They're building power lines. They're opening up roads. All these things are known to affect species. And they say that overall, in the last 30 years, despite the fact that human activities have really impacted these places, conservation and protected areas are the best hope for species around the world. They're the best hope we've got. So it's bad news in some respects. The areas are being degraded, but there is hope. The overall idea is good. It just needs proper funding and proper policing.
Matt McGrath. The Egyptian footballer Mohamed Salah has had an astonishing season, finishing as the top scorer in the English Premier League and leading his club side Liverpool to the European Champions League final. That takes place in just over a week. In the meantime, Salah can celebrate a rather unusual tribute. His boots are going on display among the Egyptian antiquities at the British Museum. James Copnell went along to find out more.
So here we are, just near the Mummy Galleries on the upper floor of the British Museum. We're here in the gallery which highlights the Tomb Chapel of Nabamun, which is one of the highlights of the collection.
This is Neil Spencer, the museum's keeper of ancient Egypt and Sudan.
And in the display case, there's 2 ancient Egyptian sandals made of palm fibre. These date to around 1300 BC, so slightly tongue-in-cheek. We think putting Mohamed Salah's football boots next to this ancient Egyptian footwear is a nice thing to do with the Champions League final coming up.
Back in his office, he explained why a museum celebrated for its ancient objects has now acquired a very new, very turquoise and blue pair of football boots.
With Mohamed Salah having this amazing season in Liverpool, Player of the Year, winning the Golden Boot, about to lead the Egyptian national team, the Pharaohs, to Russia for the World Cup, it seems a perfectly British museum story, integrating, an Egyptian icon with a global impact, but there's also a British element to the story, and so we thought it would be a fantastic addition to the collection, a very modern one, but that speaks to the interconnectedness of all these different parts of the world.
Mo Salah's burgeoning stardom has made him an idol in Egypt, his image used to sell objects from pillows to lanterns, his bright smile illuminating murals, his every kick cheered on TV screens by adoring fans. His boots may attract visitors to the British Museum too, which is developing a collection to represent modern Egypt alongside the more well-known mummies and statues of pharaohs. So what does Neil Spencer think one of his successors, in hundreds or perhaps thousands of years, will make of Mo Salah's boots?
Boots like this will tell a story, of course, about football, about fame in the early 21st century, about modern Egypt, about technology, about trade. I mean, there's so many countries and individuals and companies involved in such an object. So there'll be many different ways of doing it. I don't think we can even predict what those are.
Mohamed Salah's goal-scoring feats have made him one of the hottest prospects in world football. His boots, though, will have to cool off for a bit. They, like every object entering the British Museum, will be put into the freezer for 48 hours to kill off any bugs or moths that could damage other artefacts in the collection.
James Copnell. Still to come on this podcast, a school in China turns to surveillance cameras to make sure its pupils are paying attention. And as rehearsals take place for this weekend's royal wedding, we look at how Meghan Markle and Prince Harry might use their platform after their big day. A woman whose former partner died at a euthanasia clinic after she threw sulfuric acid over him has been cleared of murder. Berliner Wallace attacked Mark van Dongen at their flat in England in 2015 after discovering he had a new girlfriend. He suffered horrific injuries and decided to end his life in a clinic in his native Belgium. A jury in Britain acquitted Wallace of murder and manslaughter, but found her guilty of throwing a corrosive substance with intent. Our correspondent John Kay has been speaking to the victim's father, and you may find parts of this report disturbing.
When it happened and I first went to the hospital, I didn't even recognise him.
Kees van Dongen, reflecting on the moment he first visited his son after he'd been attacked with sulfuric acid. Paralysed and blinded, more than a year later, Mark van Dongen was granted euthanasia at a Belgian hospital.
It was very hard. It was unbearable. He had no life left. We had explored every avenue, and in the end I just had to agree and accept his decision.
As for Berliner Wallace, the South African fashion student he'd treated like a daughter and who's now been convicted of throwing the acid.
To me, she's the devil incarnate. What happened to Mark? All that suffering.
Somebody threw acid over his face, apparently.
Mark van Dongen's pain can be heard in this 999 call as neighbours rang for an ambulance. He'd staggered out of the couple's Bristol flat, begging for help.
Is he or she still here? I don't know.
This has been a highly unusual trial. The prosecution argued that Berliner Wallace was guilty of murder, even though Mark van Dongen chose to end his life more than a year after the attack. But after 13 hours of deliberation, the jury found she was not responsible for his death. They found her guilty only of throwing a corrosive fluid with intent. Detective Inspector Paul Catton is from Avon and Somerset Police.
Acid is one of the most deadly weapons out there, and this case is proof of the devastation it can cause.
Belinda Wallace was told to expect a significant sentence when she returns to court next week.
John Kay. There aren't many of us who can say we never messed around at school, but pupils at one school in China will now have to be on their best behaviour when in class. The school in Hangzhou is testing a surveillance system which checks if its pupils are paying attention during lessons. I asked our Asia Pacific editor Michael Bristow how it would work.
It's based on a series of cameras in classrooms which are going to be pointing at the students and watching their every move. So it doesn't just recognise movement, it also recognises actually emotions, really complicated facial expressions like fear or anger or confusion, perhaps what the teacher might be saying. So it's able to recognise that, then feed all this information in real time to the teacher and tell them if students are listening, if they might be kind of reading down at their textbook, or even if they've dozed off a little bit. So that's what it's going to do.
And why have they decided to do this? Is it such a big problem, kids misbehaving in Chinese schools?
I can't imagine it's a great problem. I've been to many Chinese schools in my time. I've never seen usually a kind of more ordered row of kids when they're kind of listening to their teacher. I think it's mainly part of a wider plan in China to have facial recognition and use artificial intelligence to facilitate and improve all kinds of things in society. So, for example, one way in which artificial intelligence and facial recognition is being used is to catch criminals.
You see, that's obviously good if they're catching criminals. But if they're saying, oh, we're doing it to improve society, it does sound a bit scary, the fact that you're being surveilled the entire time. What's the reaction been to this idea?
Reaction to this has been mixed. Some kids said that they were now behaving a lot more because, of course, they're being watched and monitored all the time. Others mentioned, though, that it does appear to have some kind of a little bit of a sinister aspect to it. You know, they're afraid to even let their minds wander because that might reflect on their faces and they might sort of like alert the teacher that they're not really concentrating. It does feed into a wider issue of privacy in China. Individual rights are not as keenly supported in the legal system. The Chinese government does really display an idea that it wants to control people. So using artificial intelligence like this to control people who don't have a lot of rights to protect themselves has a lot of people worried.
And finally, do you think this would have made you behave in school? Because I don't think it would have done for me. I think I'd have just rebelled on purpose. Do you think a young Michael Bristow would have sat down and paid attention more?
I don't know if I can answer that question. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Who knows?
Michael Bristow. Thousands of people have been marching in the Georgian capital Tbilisi to mark Family Purity Day. The event was introduced by the Georgian Orthodox Church to counter the International Day Against Homophobia. Georgia's LGBT community cancelled its own rally because of fears for their own safety. Rayhan Dimitri sent this report from Tbilisi.
Holding religious icons and banners proclaiming the 17th of May as a day of family purity, Georgia's Orthodox priests led thousands of their followers in a procession towards the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Tbilisi. Inside the cathedral, dozens of heterosexual couples were wedded in a religious ceremony to underline that a marriage is a unity between a man and a woman. While much of the world marks the 17th of May as International Day Against Homophobia, Georgia's LGBT community was forced to cancel its rally because of safety concerns. In Georgia, gays, lesbians and transgender people often have to hide from society because a religiously conservative priesthood actively promotes intolerance towards sexual minorities. 5 years ago today, a small group of LGBT activists were attacked by angry crowds led by Orthodox priests who attempted to beat them with stinging nettles and wooden chairs. Georgian society is divided between those who consider freedom of expression as their basic right and those who believe liberalism threatens their traditional values.
Rayhan Dimitri. Hawaii's most active volcano has erupted. It shot a plume of ash almost 10 kilometres into the air, and dust from the volcanic cloud is raining down on the surrounding area. Residents have been told to take shelter. Mount Kilauea has been erupting violently for 2 weeks, leading to the evacuation of hundreds of people from the area. And scientists describe the situation at the volcano as very active and warn the danger might not be over. I've been speaking to the photojournalist Joseph Anthony. He's currently in an abandoned house inside a mandatory evacuation zone.
Unfortunately, right now in heavy rain, the visibility's dropped right down. But the active fissures that I've been observing here since last Saturday, basically numbers 16, 17, 18, sort of ahead and to the right of me, and then behind 19 and 20, they've all been clearly visible because I'm in a house on a hill that has an amazing panoramic view, and we're on the upper floor, and we can see out to the active fissures. So, and they're only 17, 18 and 16 are only a few hundred yards away.
Wow. And when you say active fissure, describe what that looks like.
Okay, so there's a combination of lava erupting out of them and venting, or a combination of the two. So we've had one that's straight ahead of me right now, which unfortunately I can't see due to the rain. But about 10 minutes ago, you could see it very clearly. You could see the lava coming out of the fissure. And that one's been continuously erupting like that since last weekend. Just to the right of that, kind of 2 or 3 degassing events, cones. They're mostly very violent, very explosive releases of gas and steam, occasionally with big chunks of lava as well. So depending on how violent it is and the pressure under which it's coming out, there can be huge, even bus-sized or even larger. This morning I saw an absolutely massive chunk blown up into the air. And some of the lava can be thrown 100, 200 yards, easy. That's horizontally. And vertically, I mean, it's very difficult to say, but very high.
Are you safe where you are now, or do you think you might have to evacuate at some point?
The issue in the house here is couplefold. It's not currently an issue for being hit by lava. Based on where the fissures are at the moment, they haven't been able to throw anything in this direction. But of course, that could change if another fissure opens sort of underneath us. So the other issue with it is the direction of the wind causing sulfur dioxide fumes to be blown in this direction. So far, it hasn't been too much of a threat. It turned in our direction a little bit this morning, but then turned back again. So I almost left this morning. I do have gas masks with spare scrubbers, but I wouldn't want to be hanging around in it for any length of time. At the moment with the rain and poor visibility, that's also something to be more alert about, because I can't actually tell whether it's just mist from the rain or volcanic smoke and steam with the sulfur dioxide in it. So those are the hazards at the moment.
And if you want to see some of Joseph's pictures, you can find him on Twitter at JoeAir17. And finally, rehearsals have been taking place in Windsor here in the UK for the royal wedding of the year. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will marry on Saturday. There's still lots that we don't know, though, like what Miss Markle will be wearing or who will walk her down the aisle after she confirmed that her father won't be attending because of health reasons. And as well as wedding preparations over the past few months, the couple have also been laying the foundations for their work after the big day. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell looks at how, among the pomp and ceremony, they're establishing themselves as global campaigners.
A freezing cold day in Nottingham, England, and a lesson in how to train the global spotlight on a favourite cause. This was Meghan and Harry's first royal engagement, and the world's media were there to record it. The date was December the 1st, which also happened to be World AIDS Day. Prince Harry, following in his mother's footsteps, has long campaigned to improve AIDS and HIV awareness, and that day was the perfect opportunity to use the media to highlight the issue. Lizzie Jordan was among the first to meet them. She's HIV positive and founded a charity encouraging young people to talk about difficult issues.
They're phenomenal and so clued up, actually. We're really very aware of the discrimination that people still feel, the stigma that surrounds the condition, and they knew full well that actually their choice of talking about the condition and the attention that follows them, how they could utilise that for the benefit of everybody living with HIV.
Devoting his time and energy to supporting causes he believes in is nothing new for Harry. During his gap year, when he was 19, he spent time in Lesotho in southern Africa. He was so moved by what he saw, particularly the plight of children orphaned by the AIDS epidemic, that he co-founded the charity Sentabale. In the years since, he's returned frequently to the country and is closely involved with the projects it undertakes. Sentabale's chief executive is Kathy Ferrier.
He has an ability to connect with youngsters in a way which is completely natural and just part of his personality. And therefore, when he is campaigning, when he's on a global stage, actually what he talks about is his personal experience. And that comes through, it's very authentic and it's real. And therefore, I think that allows him to be a very effective campaigner.
And Megan, right down here.
Famous as an actress, Meghan Markle has also used her profile to try and initiate change. She travelled to Rwanda in 2016 with the charity World Vision and was a UN advocate for women. Last year, she went to Mumbai to highlight a small charity empowering women living in the city's slums. The Mina Mahila Foundation now has a global profile as one of the 7 charities the couple have chosen to benefit from wedding gift donations. Its founder is Sahani Jalota.
We were definitely very surprised, but we were happy that she really kept her word, that she would support us in any way that she could, and I think this is the best way that she could have shown her support.
After the wedding, Meghan will become the 4th patron of the Royal Foundation alongside her husband and in-laws, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They've achieved plaudits for their Heads Together campaign, focusing on mental health. Bereavement, cyberbullying and conservation are issues the foundation has already focused on. And with Meghan on board, there's likely to be a new focus. This is her speaking at the foundation's first annual forum held in February.
You'll often hear people say, well, you're helping women find their voices. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice, they need to feel empowered to use it, and people need to be encouraged to listen.
Camilla Tominey is the royal editor of the British newspaper The Sunday Express.
Prince Harry was already very effective and has done great work for his charities. If you look at the Invictus Games and how successful that's been, just as an isolated example. With the added power of Meghan and the fact that she has an ability to reach perhaps the parts that other royals haven't, and that combined force, if you look at previous power couples on the world stage like Brad and Angelina, I think Meghan and Harry can match that and in fact surpass it.
The international media frenzy which has followed their every move is expected to die down after the wedding, but Harry and Meghan's profiles are such that as husband and wife, they will undoubtedly be a campaigning force to be reckoned with.
Sarah Campbell reporting. And wherever you are in the world, you can hear our special coverage of the royal wedding on the BBC World Service from 10 hours GMT on Saturday. And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered on it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Charlotte Gallagher. Until next time, goodbye.